I can't think of a better way to open our program than a wide-ranging conversation between David Rubenstein and David Axelrod. So David Rubenstein, no doubt known to everybody in this room. He comes from a humble background. He grew up in Baltimore. His dad was a mailman. His mother was a stay-at-home parent. Now he's one of the most successful people in the world. He's the co-founder and co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group. You all know who the Carlyle Group is. He's on too many boards for me to mention, so I won't. In addition to being one of the world's most successful investors, he is a leader in philanthropy. He's an original signer of the Giving Pledge. He's a significant donor to many, many nonprofit organizations. He's a recipient of lots of philanthropic awards, including the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy and MoMA's David Rockefeller Award. And you know, since we're all, or most of us, are in the real estate business, I'll mention something that I heard. I can't swear that it's true, but I heard that when David went to law school here, by the way, at the University of Chicago Law School, and I heard that when he was here at law school, the only class in which he got an A+ was real estate. So we clearly have the right. Now, the rest of those non-A+s were probably A's and A-minuses, I'm guessing. But anyway, we clearly have the right person here. But seriously, if you have had the privilege of meeting David, or if you've read his books, or heard him speak, seen him on TV, one of the things that you know about him is that he views the world through a wide lens with a deep understanding not only of business and economics, but of history, geopolitics, and I would say, most importantly, human nature. And if you've seen even a single episode of the David Rubenstein Show, where he interviews former U.S. presidents, world business leaders, Supreme Court justices, other political and cultural icons, you know that he's taken the art of interviewing to a whole new level. So it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to turn it over to David Rubenstein, who will introduce David Axelrod, and then they'll have a conversation. So thank you.
David. So David Axelrod, as I think many of you know, is a man I think most responsible for electing President Barack Obama. He discovered Barack Obama when he was a state senator, or actually knew him before then.
Before he was
before that.
Senator, yeah.
And he saw a president in the making there, and was the principal political advisor for Barack Obama in his Senate campaign, and then ultimately in his presidential campaign. Worked in the White House for 4 years. I went to law school at the University of Chicago, and David went to undergraduate at the University of Chicago. I'm from the East Coast. David's from the East Coast. And now he's very frequently involved in commenting on political campaigns and other things. And tonight you'll see him on CNN, where he will be talking about the elections we're going to talk about in a moment. And he's also written a terrific autobiography of his life in politics, and how he took a modestly successful state senator and made him president of the United States. So, David, thank you.
I'm sure he would give me all the credit.
So, David, thanks for doing this. And David, when our country was started in 1776, more or less, we had 3 million people, and 500,000 of them were slaves, so they couldn't participate in government, and 1.25 million were white women who couldn't participate in government. So you had 1.25 million white men, and 10,000 were Jewish, so they couldn't participate in government. So, so you had, and you had to have property to participate in government. So about 500,000 people. Out of the 500,000 people who could participate in government, you got George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. Now we have 330 million people. Where are the George Washingtons, Thomas Jeffersons? Where are they?
They're harder to find because the group's so large now. You see, when it was smaller,
right,
you could really separate the wheat from the chaff.
You don't think they're in private equity, right?
No, I suspect real estate attorneys.
Really, that's where they are. They're hiding out in real estate.
See, I learned a few things in politics here.
So let's talk about this, what you're going to talk about tonight. And by the way, CNN, I assume, has exit polls, right?
I believe they probably will, yeah.
So normally when exit polls happen, on TV during the day, the exit polls usually, I think, are completed by around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that.
Well, they're rolling, so you get them in waves. So, a wave will come in at early in the day and 5 o'clock, and then they'll keep refining it based on returns once the polls close. So.
The networks don't like to say who's going to win before, so they like to wait for 1 minute after polls close and say, based on 1 minute of returns, we know this person's going to win. But that's really based on the exit polls, I assume. So, but during the day, I always observe that, at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, the newscasters are saying, well, we think that somebody's doing pretty well in this case.
Yes.
They're kind of telegraphing the exit polls, right?
They are, yes.
And so let's talk about what you think is going to happen tonight.
Let me just say, David, I began my career at the Chicago Tribune, and seared in the consciousness of everyone there was a headline that said, Dewey beats Truman. And I think that is the way news directors look at these things. They don't want to be the one who called the race the wrong way. So.
Well, sometimes elections are stolen too, right?
Well, I don't know how to answer that because there are implications to that question, but I'm also sitting here in Chicago, so, which...
Okay. Well, remember, candidate John Kennedy got a famous call from Richard Daley the night of the election, and I think Daley said something like, with the help of a few friends, I think we're going to win Illinois.
Yes.
So who were those few friends? Were they alive, or you don't know?
They're probably not alive, and they lived along the riverfront here in Chicago.
So today, obviously, former President Trump has more influence in campaigns than any former president I've ever read about or heard about. Do you see any analogy where a former president had this much influence in elections?
No. I mean, but there is no analogy to Trump, really. I mean, he is sui generis in my reading of modern American history. And he's leading sort of a movement, some would say a cult, within the Republican Party, and he's still very, very strong. I mean, Richard Nixon campaigned and revitalized himself in the 1966 elections, but it was nothing like this. And here's the interesting thing, David. He has endorsed candidates, and that will be a fascination to people tonight. How did the Trump-endorsed candidates do? But even those candidates he hasn't endorsed are sort of molding themselves in his image and claiming to be simpatico with him. So that speaks to the power that he still retains within the Republican Party.
Sometimes he doesn't remember the names of the candidates he's endorsed. Remember, he endorsed J.D. Mandel, I think, who doesn't exist.
But he can point, can he?
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about tonight. The big campaign tonight that people are focused on is the Senate race in Pennsylvania. You've got Dr. Oz and David McCormick, and now a new candidate,
Kathy Barnett, yes.
And so between the three of them, any guess what's going to happen?
I think this is going to be actually one of those nights where no one's going to want to make a call too early because, I mean, the last poll I saw had Oz at 29, Barnett at 27, and McCormick at 21. I think it feels like the least likely outcome is that McCormick wins that primary, and he probably would be the most formidable general election candidate for the Republican Party. But what you have in Pennsylvania basically are two counterfeit MAGA candidates in McCormick and Oz, and the genuine article in Barnett, who was at the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, who is ardently anti-abortion rights and checks all the boxes. And so I think MAGA voters have sort of identified her, or at least a core of them, as the real thing, and the other two as kind of counterfeits.
Well, how can McCormick not win? He's been in the hedge fund world. And some people know hedge fund people are really, really good people?
I think that let's just say I think they know he's been in the hedge fund world.
Okay. So tonight, overall, when all the elections results are in, would you expect that it's going to show that the MAGA forces are pretty strong in this country?
Yeah, I think in North Carolina, the candidate who Trump endorsed, Congressman Budd, will probably be the candidate for the Senate. there, running against McCrory, the former governor, who was more of the establishment choice there. Trump did he's very much aware of his win-loss record, you know that. So he slipped in late and endorsed a candidate for governor who's also far right and hooked up with Barnett, Doug Mastriano, who also was at the insurrection, for governor there, because I think he thinks he's going to win. It could be that Trump will have a very good night.
But when he endorses somebody, does he write a big $1 million check for them or help them raise money, or what does he do?
Well, you know Donald Trump. Do you know him to write big $1 million checks to anybody?
I think he gets a $5,000 check.
Yes.
That's basic.
Old real estate guy. This crowd must know him. No, I think he thinks the gift that he gives is the gift of his endorsement. And honestly, Dr. Oz would not be in the race but for Donald Trump here.
So the question on everybody's mind who cares about politics is Trump going to run again or not? So why don't you tell us what he's going to do?
All right, well, this is between us, right?
Right.
I really expect him to run. You know, Donald Trump is about as subtle as a screen door on a submarine, right? And he's telling people he's going to run, and I believe he's going to run because I think he wants... I'll tell you a story. The night before, remember the famous White House Correspondents' Dinner where Obama roasted Trump? And
did you help write those jokes?
I did. So
you're responsible for Trump running for president?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that. But I the night before, I actually was at Mayor Bloomberg had a small dinner thing, and I was, by happenstance, seated next to Ivanka Trump. And she said, and we had a very pleasant chat. And I saw her the Sunday after the event at some other event around the White House Correspondents' Week. And I said, gee, I hope your dad wasn't upset, you know, all in good fun and all of that. And she said, oh, don't worry about him. As long as he's the center of attention, he's fine. So you make yourself the center of attention by running and being president of the United States.
Well, do you think it's possible that he could get elected again?
I do. Yeah, I really do. I mean, if you look at polling, his numbers are not good, but they've rebounded. It was, certainly for someone who was linked to kind of a catastrophic event at the Capitol and who had such a stormy tenure as president, you would expect there to be some residual damage, and perhaps there is, but his numbers are even or better than in President Biden's right now. So.
And if the election were held today, do you think Biden today, do you think Trump would win today?
I think it's very possible, yeah. Because, I mean, you know, Biden is caught up in the whirlwind of events here. You know, he was hired basically to bring stability and calm and competence to government, but there are things that are beyond the control of any president. And you know, I think when you put together the continuing concerns about the pandemic, even though I think he did a very creditable job on it, inflation, crime, and people in Chicago feel that acutely. Ukraine, on which I think he's done an excellent job, but we're still looking at images of slaughter there. I just think there's a sense that things are out of control. He's not in command, and that is his fundamental problem. So, you know, it sets itself up for a kind of more of a, you know, I guess authoritarian is a word you could use, but the strongman candidacy. And obviously that's what Trump would be. I would watch, David, also Governor DeSantis in Florida, because I have this theory, and it animated my thoughts about why Barack Obama could get elected president in 2008, that when it comes to the presidency, people never look for the replica of what they have. Even when the president is popular, a retiring president, for example, they look for the remedy to the things that they don't like about the incumbent. So what is it that people don't like about Biden? It's not his character or his commitment. You know, one is age, and the other is their perception of strength. So here comes DeSantis, who's a guy in his 40s, and who, you know, is like the captain of the football team throwing the geek against the lockers to get a laugh from the cheerleaders, you know. So, I mean, I think he's setting himself up to be the anti-Biden.
Well, let's talk about age. Obviously, I think the baby boomers are the most important generation in our country's history. I assume you agree with that.
I thought I heard some applause back there.
But,
Yeah, I think the baby boomers,
people-
boomers have a mixed record.
well, some people say the baby boomers won't get off the main stage. And the other night, your colleague at CNN, David Gergen, said he didn't think Trump or Biden should run because Biden would be 82 when he ran and 86 if he finished the term. And Trump would actually be 78 if he ran and 82 when he finishes the term. So what do you think about the idea of saying, let's not have people who are over the age of 72, let's say?
No, I think it's, how old are you?
72.
I think that he, I think we do have a minimum age for the presidency, 35 years old. And it does raise the question. I mean, I sat in the office next to the President of the United States, not for 4 years because I love to come back to do the campaign, but for 2 years. And it is, and you've been in the White House, it's stunning to see what comes to that desk, not, you know, serially by day, but serially by hour. Things of grave importance, and generally things that are almost impossible to solve. And it is a crushing, demanding job. And what David Gergen said was, who himself is 80, he said, I've lost a step, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect people at that stage in their lives to perform at their peak, and that's what you need. I mean, I think there's real merit to that argument.
Is there any truth to the rumor that Barack Obama has told Joe Biden at one point when he was thinking of running, you know, Joe, this is a job for a 50-year-old person, not a late 70 person?
I don't know what he told him, but I know that he's told me, not in reference to Biden, but he said, you know, I came here when I was relatively young. I'm in my 40s. And he said, by the end of it, I felt the accumulated weight of this, and I was not what I was. When I came, he said, you learn how to compensate. He always has basketball analogy. He said, you know, like Michael Jordan, he changed his game at the end of his career because his experience taught him how to do things. But, so I don't know if he said it, but it wouldn't shock me if he did.
Was he really that good a basketball player?
He would say so.
Right, okay.
No, he actually was. But I will tell you, he had a party for his 50th birthday when he was in the White House, and he invited all these NBA All-Stars to come and play a game at Fort McNair for the wounded warriors, and who filled the stands. And it was a really nice thing to do. But all these NBA players they treated him like a porcelain bowl. They didn't. And the late Kobe Bryant was injured. He was there. He was sitting on the sidelines, and he called over. I think Chris Paul was one of them. And he called these guys over, and he said, "You guys are the two little meanest," and then he inserted an adjective, "in the league, and you won't get within 10 feet of that guy. Play ball," you know. And then finally, he insulted. He so insulted Joakim Noah, who was a center from the Bulls, about how ugly his shot was, that Noah just said, okay, fine. And he was like an octopus, and he completely strangled the president, who never scored again.
What do you think of the view that if Mr. Naismith, who invented basketball, had been Jewish, the rim would be at 8 feet, so people Jewish could dunk the ball? But okay. So let's talk about Barack Obama for a moment. So you graduated from the University of Chicago. You became a journalist. And how did you get into political consulting? Is that a higher form of endeavor than journalism?
My life, my interest in being a journalist was really spawned by my interest in politics. John F. Kennedy came to Stuyvesant Town in New York, where I grew up. You all in this room are sophisticated enough to recognize Stuyvesant Town as the site of probably the worst real estate transaction in history, right before the crash. But I grew up there when it was a built for returning war veterans. And JFK came in the middle of the afternoon, 10 days before the 1960 election, or maybe 12 days, which it was unusual in and of itself, David, because a Democrat campaigning for votes in New York State is something 12 days before the election is something we wouldn't see here. They only go to New York now to raise money. And I was so transfixed by this that, the woman who took care of me put me on top of a mailbox, and I watched this whole thing. And I literally from that moment, I was fascinated by politics, gave out leaflets for his brother when I was 9, he was running for the Senate in New York, broke with the Democratic Party when I was 10 and worked for John Lindsay, who you remember, a liberal Republican. And if you guys want to know what a liberal Republican looks like, they've got 2 on display at the Field Museum. And I came to the University of Chicago because it was such an interesting political town. But I got to the University of Chicago at that time, and I couldn't find anybody who really wanted to talk about anything that happened after the year 1800.
Right.
So I became a journalist for that reason. And when I graduated, I went to work at the Chicago Tribune, and I very quickly became a political writer for the Tribune. But then I switched over in '84. Paul Simon, who many of you Illinoisans will remember, was a congressman running for the U.S. Senate, and I really, really admired him, and he was on me for a long time. And I had concerns about where the newspaper business was going, and I just made the leap, and it was a good decision.
You didn't think the newspaper business was going to grow and prosper as it has done?
Exactly. I missed that whole. I missed that whole thing.
All right. So when did you first meet Barack Obama?
So a friend of mine in Chicago, and I know at least one person here knows her, named Betty Lou Saltzman, was doyen of kind of liberal politics in Chicago, called me and said, "I just met the most impressive young man, and I think you ought to meet him." She said, Barack Obama. I said, wow, interesting name. But so I'm happy to meet anybody you want me to meet, Betty Lou, but why do you want me to meet him? She said, I think he could be the first black president of the United States. This was in 1992. So now whenever I go to the track, I take Betty Lou with me.
When did you meet him?
So I had lunch with him, I did not walk away humming "Hail to the Chief," but I'll tell you what I do remember. He talked about what he wanted to do. He came back from Harvard. He was working at a small civil rights firm and teaching at the University of Chicago. And he said, I really want to I want to do something larger than myself. I want to do something that actually helps people and the community, and I'm thinking of running for public office. And the thing that was striking, David, is he had just been president of the Harvard Law Review, and that was national news, you'll remember. He could have written his ticket at any corporation, any law firm in America, and set himself up for life, and this is what he chose to do. So what struck me at that moment was the world of politics divides into 2 categories: people who want to be something and people who want to do something. And he was in that smaller, more admirable second cohort. So we became friends.
Well, he was a community organizer. What is a community organizer?
Well, not as it was described during the campaigns that we ran, I'll tell you, by the other side. No, he came and he worked for a conglomerate of churches on the south side of Chicago, in neighborhoods that were devastated when the steel mills closed and had really fallen on hard times. And he was organizing people to sort of petition the government for more schools, for better parks, for that's essentially what he was doing.
And so he ran for the state House of Delegates. Is that?
He ran for the state Senate.
Senate, and he got elected.
Well, yes, he I think. At the end of the day, he was unopposed. There's a long story associated with that, which I won't tell. But he went to the state Senate.
He went to the state Senate, and the woman that he was going to run against later came back and said she wanted to run, and he kept her off the ballot or something like that.
Yes, he challenged her petitions, and she was.
Then he runs for the United States House of Representatives.
Yes, loses narrowly by 30 points.
30 points, 2-1.
Yeah.
So what would make him think that after losing 2-1 to Bobby Rush, all of a sudden he's going to get elected to the United States Senate? How'd that happen?
Well, I can tell you that he called me in the summer of 2020, not 2022, of 2002, and he said, I have one race left to run. He said, I promised Michelle, if I lose this one, I will go and make a living. And he said, but I want to run for the United States Senate. There was a Republican at the time, Peter Fitzgerald, who ultimately did not run for re-election. But there were a lot of other candidates. He was considered a third-tier candidate, not just because he had lost by 30 points, not just because he was completely broke, but because his name was Barack Hussein Obama, and it was 1 year after 9/11, and there was this sense that that would be a bad ballot name. In fact, there was one consultant, not this consultant, who told him that he should, that his childhood name was Barry. That's what his family called him. So you should run as Barry Obama. And he just laughed at that. He said, that's fine. He said, but that's not my name.
Okay, so he runs, and then he ultimately wins the Democratic primary.
Miraculously, really.
Because there was a sex scandal against one of the candidates.
Well, that candidate who spent $30 million on his campaign was one obstacle. But there were 7 candidates in the race. One of them was a highly regarded state comptroller with a very famous political name. So it wasn't what was astonishing about that primary on primary night was that we thought if we could get 38% of the vote in a 7-candidate field that we would win. He ended up getting 53% of the vote and carrying places that you would not have predicted an African-American
So he won the primary.
Yeah.
But helped by a sex scandal by one of the candidates, I thought.
Yes, yes, you said that. Yeah.
And then the Republican candidate had a sex scandal as well.
Yes.
So, but that one there was no sex in that scandal. So remember, this was somebody who was going to take his wife to a sex club. They didn't actually go to it, but that became the scandal.
Yeah, it was a little more. It was a little more involved than that. But
all right, okay. All right, okay. So anyway, he gets elected.
Yes.
And so once he's elected, did he say, you know?
Well, you know what happened was that the Republican Party then intimidated by this wave of support for Obama thought, well, we got to go and get our own African American candidate, and they recruited him from Maryland, Alan Keyes.
A good state, but
yeah, who was a very, very hard right kind of candidate. Yeah, and Obama ended up getting 70% plus.
Right, so he wins the election.
Yeah.
As soon as he wins the Senate seat, does he say to you, David, I'm now going to run for president?
No. In fact, we were so frightened of this because we didn't want people in Illinois to think that this was just a way station. And the first thing he did at his press conference was say, I will not be a candidate for national office. And he said it again on Meet the Press with our friend Tim Russert. And that was really what we believed. We did not believe that 2008 would be the year. I mean, we obviously saw national potential in Obama, did not believe that 2008 would be the year that he would run.
4 years later, he ran for president.
Yes.
And so what do people think?
He changed his mind.
Changed his mind, okay. Yeah. And did he actually think he had a chance to beat Hillary for the nomination at that time?
You know, we had a lot of conversations about this, and by this, there were a lot of people, including, by the way, Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer, who urged him to run because there was a fear that a candidate who had voted for the war in Iraq could not, would not prevail, and that a candidate who was very steeped in the politics of Washington would not prevail. So, but we did research in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and what we found was a candidate of Obama's profile, which, by the way, was not the most liberal profile in the group. He was a more moderate candidate. That kind of candidate with his profile could get nominated, and on that basis, we.
Okay, so he wins Iowa.
Yeah.
Loses New Hampshire, but then he comes back, gets the nomination. And did you have any doubt once he got the nomination he'd be elected president?
I really didn't. I have to say, and this is going to sound grandiose and maybe disingenuous in the retelling, I felt like once we won the Iowa caucuses, I felt at that moment that he was going to get elected president. I thought it was going to be a Democratic year. I thought he would be the nominee. And I was very confident. And I never lost that confidence throughout that year.
So when he gets elected president, does he say to you, his first act is, David, you come to the White House? Was that his first decision?
No, it wasn't his first decision. I think his first decision was where he wanted to situate his things in the White House. And there were other decisions that he had to make that took higher priority than me. But here, the God's honest truth, David, is he did talk to me about going. And at first I was really reluctant to go.
Why?
Because, as I told him, I set my whole life up. Reporters are iconoclasts, and you know, you were always challenging authority. I spent 25 years as a political strategist, and I always set my business up where if I could walk out of a campaign if I was unhappy with where a candidate was going, and I exercised that. And I told him, you know, you can't tell the President of the United States to go F himself.
You can't?
Not
in public.
Then he made, well, that's exactly what he said. He said, he made this pitch, you know, but this is why you ought to come, X, Y, Z. And at the end of it, he said, and one other thing, you can tell me to go F myself, just don't do it in front of anybody else.
So, by the way.
And I never did, by the way.
But you did in private.
Never did, never did.
Okay,
no, no, I never felt there was never an occasion on which I felt like I
have this
wanted
person
to.
who's a state senator, you helped him become a state senator, so forth. You call him, what did you call him, Barack? Barry?
Once he got elected president, I called him Mr. President.
Oh, really? You didn't keep calling him Barack? No. So today you just call him Mr. President?
We don't really address each other by name anymore.
He doesn't, okay. All right, okay. By the way, to get elected president, you had to pick a vice president. And the vice president that you picked is a person, I can't remember his name.
Yes.
Biden. So why did you pick Joe Biden?
Well, there are a lot of reasons we picked Joe Biden. I will say, we started talking about this on the plane back from, Obama won the North Carolina primary, and that primary basically told everyone this thing's over. And we started talking seriously about it on the plane back. And we had a very elaborate process. There were like 30 names in that process. But on the plane back, he said, you know, I really think we should take a hard look at Biden. And the reasons he gave were, he'd be helpful politically because he was from the upper sort of industrial region where we needed to do well. He had 36 years in Washington, and Obama was new to Washington, so he would be a great ambassador to the Congress and others. He was known around the world, and you know, there was this ancillary benefit that he didn't mention, but you know, he was already 65 years old, and it was clear that he would never run for president.
Right, that was obvious. So he wasn't going to be competing.
Right.
So, all right, so you recommended him?
I was, yes. I mean, ultimately, it came down to 3 candidates, and this is not proprietary. I think it's known now, but it was Biden, it was Evan Bayh, who was then senator from Indiana, and Tim Kaine, who was then governor of Virginia. And when there was a day when David Plouffe, our campaign manager, and I hopped from place to place on a private plane and met with all of them. And I was struck by a few things about Biden. One was Jill Biden and Beau Biden picked us up at the airport. And watching the interaction between them and the interaction between Biden and them when he arrived at his sister's house, which is where we met, was really striking to me, the warmth of that family. But the second thing was Biden himself. You know, we sat down and I did say to him, Senator, you know, we're here because Senator Obama's very serious about you as a vice presidential candidate. And I said, we just have one concern, which is, you know, you can be, I don't know how to say this, loquacious.
Talkative.
And can you control that? And he said, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Then he'd talk for an hour. But
2 hours, 2 hours. And every 10 minutes he would say, am I making sense? Do you understand what I'm saying here? And but I had to concede he was making sense. And the other thing that Obama said that was absolutely true was, if you go back and look at the debates from the primary in 2008, Joe Biden actually did quite well. And he didn't overtalk. In fact, you may remember Brian Williams asked him at one of those debates, the same question. People say you talk too much, but can you control yourself? And Biden just said yes.
That's a good answer.
And he let it hang there, and it was
on your list of 30 potential people,
yes,
were there any private equity people? No?
we eliminated them
Right.
away.
Oh, too bad. Okay, so the elections that are coming up.
Only because we couldn't afford them.
Well, as long as you keep carried interest the way it is. So, and that should be in the Constitution, don't you think, carried interest? My theory is that James Madison meant to put.
I heard you owned a
rights.
copy and penciled that in.
Right. That's what I would have done. So, the midterm elections. Let's be, honest. The Democrats are going to get shellacked in the House, right?
I think it's highly likely, yeah. I mean, if you were a doctor and you looked at the chart right now, you'd look at all the vital signs, and they're not good. You look at the direction of the country. Wall Street Journal, the NBC News poll this past week had that at 16% right direction, which was, I think, the lowest they've ever had it. That's not good. President's approval rating seems to be stuck in the low 40s. We've got inflation where it is. Well,
Barack Obama, though,
yes.
After his first midterm, he lost 64 seats, I think.
63.
63, sorry.
You don't have to gild the lily.
Okay, 63 seats.
I still have the tire tracks on my rear end.
What did it feel like to be there the day after, the night of the election, you lose 63 seats? So you'd take that like a personal rejection?
Only before the first couple of drinks. No, listen, we expected, we didn't expect that. And the saddest thing, Obama called me, and this is what worries me about this election, honestly. And he went down a list of members of the House and asked how they had done. And every single one of them had lost. And they were people who came from swing districts, who were really talented leaders, who understood how to work across the aisle. And he said very, very softly, we just lost the future of the Democratic Party. There is a great class of Democratic legislators in the Congress who were elected in 2018. Many of them were honed, were forged in military service and other national service. And they represent swing districts. And they're the ones who are on the bubbles. What you're going to have in 2023 is a much more polarized Congress than we have today. You're going to have fewer Democratic moderates, you're going to have fewer Republican moderates, and you're going to have more, MAGA-type Republicans, and you're going to have more squad-type Democrats, and I think it's going to be that much harder to try and forge compromise, and that's a real concern. And that was our concern then as well.
So, okay, if the House, let's say it does go Republican, the Senate could
we should just point out, it is almost impossible to conceive of a set of circumstances where the House doesn't go Republican. And, we should talk about the impact of Roe versus Wade, but there have only been 2 times since World War II where the incumbent president gained seats in the midterm elections, and that was in 1998 when Bill Clinton, the economy was booming and the Republicans miscalculated on impeachment, and in 2002, right after the war in Iraq, when Bush was riding high. But it's almost unheard of that you'd gain seats. Republicans need 5 seats to take over the House. Right now, the estimates are they'd gain between 25 and 30 seats. So even if that number is off by some, I cannot foresee a Democrat holding the gavel in 2020.
So what about in the Senate?
That, I think, is a closer call. The Republicans have 2 seats in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that are certainly at risk. In Pennsylvania, I think what happens tonight is going to be very telling. You know, as I mentioned, I think it's possible that Dr. Oz or Barnett could win, but I think unlikely. Democrats have you know, an unusual potential, probable nominee in the lieutenant governor there. But I think if those two win, it's more likely than not that Democrats carry the Pennsylvania. Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, very unpopular, depends on who the Democrats nominate. And there aren't that many vulnerable Democrats, so I think that it's possible that Democrats could hold the Senate unless the wave is just so strong that...
Well, let's suppose either way, if the House goes Republican, you expect subpoenas on Hunter Biden and everybody else that would embarrass.
I think it's, well, I don't have to imagine that because they've already made clear that's what they're going to do. I think that you will see a hue and cry among a lot of Republicans to impeach the president, and they'll fill in the details later because of I mean, there's a sense of vengeance. They did this to us, we're going to do that to him.
So you think they could vote for an impeachment, probably wouldn't prevail in the Senate, but...
Yeah, I think they could. I think they could.
Right.
But I'm just saying that is the tenor of what's coming out of the most vocal elements of the Republican caucus. And Kevin McCarthy, who's going to be Speaker of the House if they win, most likely, if Trump decides that he can stay, is very much in the thrall of the sort of Freedom Caucus in the House.
So you don't think Trump will say he wants to be Speaker of the House? You don't have to be a member of the House to be the Speaker of the House. You don't think he wants that job, right?
I think that's too small a job.
Okay, too small. Okay. So what is it about being president that makes people want to play golf so much? I mean, Barack Obama loved playing golf, and he was criticized by Trump for that, who seemed to play even more golf.
Yes.
What is it about that job that makes people want to play golf?
The truth is, I think you are so contained when you're president. I mean, both those guys played golf before, obviously, so they like the sport, but you're so contained in that White House, and you know this from your own experience. And, you know, it is a gilded cage, really. And one of the few places you can go and just walk around for 5 hours and be outside is a golf course. So in addition to liking the sport, it is a release for the president and there aren't that many available to him that give you that kind of freedom.
So when you're playing golf with, let's say, President Obama, and he's got a 50-foot putt, do you just say, just give it to him, or is that what they do? They just...
I only play basketball with him. I didn't play...
Would you beat him in basketball, or...?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. No, I don't know whether you can see from your seats, but I'm not exactly a gazelle. He is very lithe and very quick. And I'll tell you, before the Pennsylvania, there was a debate in Pennsylvania in the primaries of 2008. And we always used to play pickup games before a debate just to get, you know, it was a release and so on. And he was driving to the basket, and I kind of did that matador defense thing that you do when you're not quick enough to cover someone. And I accidentally kind of raked him across the nose. And he went down, and he was down for a long time. And I thought, what is the practice when you're the consultant and you've broken the candidate's nose hours before a national debate? And I was so relieved when the Secret Service lifted him and put him back on his feet, and his nose seemed to be aligned properly. And he was pretty forgiving, honestly, but I wasn't allowed to cover him after that.
Okay. So, all right, let's talk about who might be the next president of the United States. You've talked about Biden maybe runs again. He'd be 82, and then Trump could run. He'd be 78. Let's assume both of them say, we've heard David Gergen, we've heard David Axelrod. Maybe they should just step aside.
I think that's likely.
All right, so let's suppose neither of them runs, mostly because they've heard from you.
Yes.
Who would be the strongest Republican candidate in your view, other than Trump?
Well, who would be the strongest national candidate is not clear to me. I mean, I mentioned earlier DeSantis. You know, I have issues with the way he has behaved. But you would have to say he would be a strong candidate within the Republican primary. Whether he's a strong general election candidate, I don't know. I mean, one thing I said a long time ago that presidential races are MRIs for the soul, and whoever you are, they reveal you. And, you know, one thing about DeSantis is he's a little mean-spirited. Trump can be too, but Trump is also funny, you know, and he's kind of entertaining. DeSantis can be just gratuitously nasty. So I don't know how he'll wear in the process, but you'd have to say, you know, because of what I said earlier, he is the antithesis of Biden in that he's young and he's muscular or appearing, and that would give him some advantage. But there are a bunch of other, there'll be no dearth of candidates.
What about Pompeo? He's like lost 90 pounds. He looks different. He's in good shape.
I know. Well, if nothing else, he has that, right?
Right. He should sell a diet book.
He can't be president, but you'll probably live longer.
So what about
no, Pompeo, I think is, you know, I mean, he's a bright guy. Again, I don't know how he will wear, and, you know, maybe he's just Trump enough to get through the primaries and distant enough from Trump to avoid them. He's been actively involved with McCormick in Pennsylvania.
So there was a person who used to work for me for 25 years in private equity. He left to go run for governor of Virginia, and he got elected.
Yeah.
Is it possible that somebody that inexperienced could get elected president?
I mean, it's possible. Yeah. No. I mean, listen. Obviously, he ran a magnificent campaign and showed the ability to sort of walk the line and signify enough to the Republican base to keep them on board without going so far as to antagonize suburban moderate voters. I mean, you know, he will have just been elected governor of Virginia relatively recently and would have to essentially leave that job. Do you notice that this platform is shaking?
It's an earthquake.
Huh.
Is there an earthquake going on?
The L doesn't run underneath here, does it? All right, well, anyway.
So what about in the Democratic side?
Yeah. I don't know if that's a sign about Youngkin that...
If the Democrats, if Biden doesn't run, he has a vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris. Does he have a chance?
Look, she ran for president once before, and she didn't do well. She didn't make it to the Iowa caucuses. She's had challenges as vice president, and they haven't really given her a great portfolio to work with. But I think there are questions as to what kind of candidate she would be.
What about the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo? Thought to be a very impressive person, Rhodes Scholar, Harvard College, Yale
and a
Law
great
School.
sort of personal story, immigrant family, and so on. I think highly of her. The problem is, and you and I talked about this earlier, I think a lot depends on when Biden decides that he is or isn't running. I mean, I think he's decided he is running, but if he decides not to run at some point, at what point is that? Because there'll come a point that it's so late in the calendar that someone like Gina Raimondo can't run because she's just not well known enough. She can't put a campaign together quickly enough. But there are Mitch Landrieu, the former mayor of New Orleans, is another guy I'd put in that category. There are a lot of governors who want to run. Jared Polis from Colorado is an interesting guy. Governor Murphy from New Jersey. Governor Cooper from
Governor
North
from
Carolina.
Illinois. What about the governor?
The governor of Illinois has been mentioned. J.B. Pritzker. And some of these, Polis is quite wealthy. J.B. Pritzker is quite wealthy. They would have the resources. Would they have the time? I don't know. So if Biden decides late, the field may be contained to people who are either very famous celebrities. Mark Cuban has said he might want to run for president.
Really?
Yeah. If he doesn't win the NBA title, that's the.
So what
but I think you're left with the vice president, Amy Klobuchar, Senator Warren, potentially Pete Buttigieg again. I mean, they would have an inside track because they already have national organizations. They're already known. And so I think the timing of Biden's decision will be important.
Which way does the abortion issue cut? You think that helps the Republicans more in a national election if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, or it helps the Democrats more?
Well, I think it will help Democrats more. The question is how much. This NBC poll shows a significant increase in Democratic enthusiasm, which is something you look at relative to these elections. Generally, the governing party loses because their base is less enthused than the opposition base, who are unhappy with the status quo. This has changed that a little bit, and I think that in some swing races in suburban areas, it could make a difference. In some swing states, it could make a difference. What it is going to do, I think, is galvanize some voters who Democrats need, who wouldn't have come out otherwise, particularly younger voters who were showing signs of sitting this one out.
Now, initially, Donald Trump said that Vladimir Putin was a genius for invading Ukraine. Now he doesn't say that. What is the politics of supporting Russia? There seem to be some people who think that supporting Russia, or at least some parts of the Republican Party, do you think that's still there, or nobody's supporting Russia?
Well, if you look at polling, I mean, nationally, Putin is at, like 79 unfavorable, 3 favorable, and so obviously that's across the board. Yeah, there's the Tucker Carlson America First kind of universe, and Trump himself. I thought, David, that was such an interesting insight into Trump, not because of his affinity for Putin so much, but my objection to Donald Trump has nothing. I disagree with him on policy. I've disagreed with a lot of presidents on policy. This isn't about policy. He does not believe in rules and laws and norms and institutions, and globally, and our democracy itself relies on those things. His view is the world is the Hunger Games, and you go and you take what you want, and the strong win and the weak lose. And I think he admired Putin. I think he thought it was genius to go in and snatch another country if you could get away with it.
So, what was your most embarrassing moment at the White House, where something happened that was embarrassing, and you just said, "Uh-oh, I'm going to get fired," or "This is too funny to even talk about"?
Well, this wasn't funny, but you mentioned the midterm elections, didn't you? That was an embarrassing moment, but not one that was unexpected. I had already announced that I was going to leave. I'm trying to think. Most of my embarrassments generally had to do with food that I spilled on myself at inopportune times. The first day, actually, in the White House, I think we're getting the hook, but I think the first day in the White House, I was late for my first meeting in the Oval Office, and it seemed like all the seats were taken, and I slid into a seat, and I saw Rahm Emanuel sort of, guiding me with his head frantically to a different seat, and I realized that I had taken the vice president's seat.
Oh. All right.
And that was a little embarrassing.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.